Should I do
Yes.
this?
Do you want that mic or do you want this one?
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Amaha's closing comments really touched on what I'm going to talk about, and that's the importance of organizing African immigrants and Black immigrant communities. The Black Alliance for Just Immigration was founded in 2006. We're celebrating our 9th birthday this month. BAJI was really founded by a group of clergy and activists in the Bay Area, really to primarily address this issue of, why don't we see more Black faces in the immigrant rights movement? There's massive demonstrations happening all across the country, especially in where I'm from in Phoenix, Arizona, and we don't see, our African and Caribbean immigrant brothers and sisters in the fight and the struggle. We also are not hearing a lot from African Americans, and in fact, we're hearing rhetoric saying, this immigrant rights movement, if it's successful, it's going to, be detrimental to the African American community. They're going to come take Black jobs. And what BAJI set out is to ask the question, is like, well, where were these Black jobs before the wave of immigrants came to steal them? And aren't we really talking about racial justice? And aren't we really talking about historic discrimination, and aren't Black immigrants experiencing some of these same challenges, as being Black in America? And so that's really, where we're founded. And then the Black Immigration Network was formed by BAJI and other organizations in 2009 to really address how do we engage and build leadership, and create a joint strategy space for communities, organizations that are serving African American and Black immigrant communities to address some of these challenges, and to build a policy agenda and build social, economic, and political power. And so that's the work that we do. We have over 40 organizations as well as individual activists, academics, and clergy that come into the BIN space to help address some of these issues and these challenges. And the challenges are many, because we're talking about, what it means to be, as Amaha was talking about, being Black in the United States. There have always been Africans here on this continent, but what that has meant and how we got here is a very storied history, and that struggle, for equality, that struggle for full citizenship. When African immigrants get to the country, they get, pulled into it just in their own kind of lane and stream of, what it means to be the struggle for equity and equality and justice. And some of the challenges to, pulling these communities together and really understanding is that we don't always understand or talk about immigrant rights as a racial justice issue, although it definitely is. Our immigration policy is racialized. That's why we have this kind of high selectivity on who gets to come here and who gets to come to the United States. And so there was a hesitancy in the immigrant rights movement for many different reasons to connect it to a racial justice issue and racial justice aspect. And what we do in BAJI is we really want to center that and really talk about, the implications of what that means. And then also we have to deal with the ways that there's implicit biases, and then also overt biases when people immigrate into the United States. Everybody who immigrates into the United States, you get kind of fed this and integrated into this dominant mindset that criminalizes and marginalizes African Americans. So pitting these communities against one another, and even with this latest Pew Research study that was released about African immigrant demographics and Black immigrant demographics, even the headlines and the stories and the angles are pitting African immigrants against African Americans, almost like, these new Black people, these are the people that we need to be looking at, when in reality, because of the biased immigration policy as well as some of this kind of pitting these communities against each other, it's not really a question of whether or not their experience is different and set apart. There's a myriad of differences, and Black communities have never been monolith. That's just, not the way that it is. Our communities are very diverse. And also this high educational achievement, as well as the kind of accolades and credentials that African immigrants come to the United States with, does not protect them from racism. It doesn't protect you from being Black in America, you're having college degrees. It doesn't protect you from predatory lending. We saw in, if you look at the statistics in the home mortgage crisis, we saw that in some areas where the populations were decimated and wiped out, a huge proportion of those mortgages were people who were West African families also being swept up into this kind of, raid on Black wealth. So we need to talk about how we want to pull out the statistics and try to, set up this kind of model minority, which is all part of trying to leverage these communities, and it's all part of this kind of anti-Black framework that we have in the U.S. So it's important that we address these issues and these differences. And the way that we do it is in BIN is we have a kinship assembly that we do every 2 years, and we create this space for relationship building and kind of unpacking these questions of identity. And then also through BAJI, we have African Diaspora Dialogues, where we engage communities in like a series of discussions to really talk about what are the tensions, what are the experiences, what don't we know about each other, what don't we learn about each other, and kind of trying to break down some of these barriers, and then how do we forge these bonds in order to build this kinship and develop it. How do we move forward together, like Amaha was saying. And then what this looks like for talking about really mobilizing African immigrants on policy issues is really taking that kind of nuanced understanding and like really complicating our understanding of what is an immigrant rights issue and bringing that to the table. So, you know, we're going to hear about some of the organizing around the driver's license bill here in California, for example, and a lot of the ways that we talk about, you know, how do we make our movement more inclusive, and how do we, you know, make sure that we have a diversity of faces at the table, but are we having a diversity of policy agenda issues also at the table? So with the driver's license bill, for example, a lot of the documents that are allowed in order for somebody who's undocumented to be able to get their driver's license, majority African countries don't issue those types of documents. You know, and so that's on our part, and within the immigrant rights movement, we have to make sure that we're really not just centering a diversity of faces, but we're centering a diversity of like really what are the implications in the policies for these communities, and making sure that we're bringing that to the table. I know there's some work organizing going around there with that. And so finally, I'll talk a little bit more also about what it means to engage African immigrants in racial justice work, and talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. I know hopefully many of you are familiar with the story of Charlie Kuneng, the Cameroonian immigrant who was living on Skid Row, who was killed in March. And the reason why the police, you know, were called on him in the way that the police reacted to him was because he was Black. It was discovered later that he was an immigrant. It was discovered later he was undocumented. The organization and the communities here have been really pulling together, and you know, when they contacted his family finally, it was discovered that his family did not know that he was homeless. They did not know about his situation. And a lot of that has to do with like that kind of unique experience that Amaha was sharing about, you know, what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to have the hopes and dreams of your family, you know, resting on your shoulders. And so a lot of that stigma and isolation that he's experienced as a result of that, right, coupled with the implications for what it means to be a Black person in relation to the state. And then finally, I'll share that even within the Black Lives Matter movement, when we're talking about, you know, what does it mean for us to fight for rights, fight for our citizenship and things of that nature, you know, attaining citizenship, right, isn't going to protect me from being Black. And also, with regards to being a Black person in regards to the state, the implications for me being pulled over as an undocumented person, right, are very different than for an African American, right? So really wrestling with these issues and complicating, you know, how it is that we discuss these things is really on our part what's going to be necessary for us to really build a movement that's going to be inclusive and have the broadest impact possible.